that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal.
At the center of the crisis were these 9 teenagers, selected by the school board because of their excellent grades. The first day, 8 of the 9 went to school together, accompanied by their parents and ministers. They expected some harassment, but no real trouble. The 8 children and the adults with them were turned away by the National Guard. In mid-September, the president and the governor had a meeting at Eisenhower's vacation home in Newport, Rhode Island. Eisenhower had convinced Faubus that ultimately the state could not resist federal authority. Faubus changed his tactic. He simply removed the National Guard, leaving only city police, in an explosive situation as the Little Rock 9 entered Central High School.
We've just got a report here on this end that the students are in.
The rioting was headline news. The nation and the world saw unmistakably the face of resistance. Finally, President Eisenhower realized he had to act, and he did quickly. That night, he sent in the paratroopers of the 101st Airborne Division.
13 when Brown passed, and then 15 when we started the school desegregation in 1957. Very definitely so, very definitely so. There was a great deal of expectation and hope expressed, because now, and it had been centuries before such a thing had happened, well, I think such a thing had never happened, that the law was now on our side.
Right.
The law had said it is no longer constitutional to discriminate. That was revelation. A muted celebration, and I think that sense of hopefulness pervaded the community where I lived.
Right.
From the person who lived on the street to the person who was an accomplished professional, I think there was this tie that bound them together, that we as a people will now have a chance, whereas before, the law said you really don't have a chance. Once the 54 decision was made, they began to think about how it might be implemented in Little Rock. It took them a few years to get it all done, but interestingly enough, I think it was an instance of the board members of that time. Here were a cadre of people who thought significantly different from most of their peers, and they happened to come together. There was this confluence of like-minded people who got the ball rolling. Now, unfortunately, once their decision was made public, they lost favor. And as a consequence, they literally fell apart. But they couldn't take it back at that point. And now the politicos get involved, especially the governor. Ha! He was quite a fellow. And you know, interestingly enough, Orval Faubus, the governor, was not originally an avowed segregationist. But he saw the handwriting on the wall. If he were to be governor of Arkansas and maintain that position, he not only had to be segregationist, he had to be one of the more extreme segregationists. And so he became that.
The National Guard have been and are now being mobilized with the mission to maintain or restore the peace and good order of this community.
Your actions were such that we could have all been killed. What were you thinking? He said, well, you know, I had to do that, otherwise I would not have been reelected. So that was his whole ploy, that was his position. He was, quote, forced to do things to maintain his public office. And I said to him, you know, you had an opportunity to leave quite a different legacy, and I think you would have been more proud of it. He didn't buy it. The school board sent members or representatives to the all-black schools, Horace Mann High, Dunbar Middle School, there were just 2. They talked about this plan. September 57, Central High School will be desegregated. Well, we need students. How many of you are willing to join? We all, not all, but significant numbers of us, probably 150, or at least, raised hands. But the numbers came down very quickly once we got home and explained to our parents what we had done, because many parents were not too pleased and were fearful. And rightly so when you think about it, because the rumors of violence started immediately. And the word on the street was that there will be black blood flowing in the gutters of Little Rock if this thing happens. So most of the parents said no. But the parents of the 9 of us were willing. And how they arrived at that decision is still a mystery to all of us because none of them really spoke about it directly.
The 9th student, Elizabeth Eckford, had missed the call to gather with the others before school. Elizabeth Eckford walked alone and met a mob.
The very first day, Elizabeth came by herself. I came shortly afterwards by myself. And then a group of 7 students, including Jane, came with a group of ministers. They came en masse. We never got close to the school that day. There was no way because the National Guard was there. We couldn't even get on the grounds. We all had to go home. It took probably 3 weeks.
An extreme situation has been created in Little Rock. This challenge must be met, and with such measures as will preserve to the people as a whole their lawfully protected rights. If resistance to the federal court order ceases at once, the further presence of federal troops will be unnecessary, and a blot upon the fair name and high honor of our nation in the world will be removed. Mob rule can not be allowed to override the decisions of our courts.
And only then, because the Army was now in place. The National Guard was gone, and the Army was there. The 101st Airborne escorted us to class. And they remained for probably 5 to 6 weeks. And here's a twist. At the end of their time there, they were replaced by the now newly federalized Arkansas State National Guard. So the same guys who kept us out now have the charge of protecting us now that we're in. Now some of the 9 will say, we got hit more than we needed to because they intervened slowly. I don't know that that's true. But for me, I would often run, so I didn't catch many blows anyway. I had an ongoing relationship with fear, for one thing. Yep. I'd never been that afraid in my life. I mean, I went to school fearful and I remained fearful all day. I went home with fear. But after a time, I figured out that if I'm going to survive this thing, I'd better make some real acquaintanceship with fear. So I began the process of owning it. So once I owned the fear, it dissipated a little bit. I was able to go where I wanted to go with the fear, so I developed a mantra: fear will not interfere with goal-directed behavior. That worked. Within the school, there was some, not a lot, because within the school, the social pressure was so great on the administrators, the teachers, and the students to stay away from us. And if they got too close to us, they were branded nigger lovers, and they caught as much hell as we did. You know, the old doctrine of separate but equal was erroneous because it was always separate, and therein lies the problem. Always separate, but never equal. And so once we got to Central, there was no question that we were not going to be considered equal. No way on earth. I mean, it was a forced issue as far as the school was concerned. Most of the people there didn't want to do it. They said, look, I know the law has changed, but we don't support that. We would prefer business as usual. But Little Rock seems to capture the imagination in a different way, and I'm not quite sure why. But Minnie Jean, one of our group, says it's because there were so many elements in the story. That's Little Rock talks about state versus federal government in terms of power and control. It speaks about long-standing ways of living being challenged. It involves kids, it involves parents, it involves people on both sides of that equation, those supportive and those not supportive. And all of those things, I think, gets enough people involved as a group. So the group widens the more things are focused on in that episode. I think for me, it's worth saying that Little Rock proved that if your focus is keen and you have goals you want to accomplish, then you can do it in spite of the opposition, no matter how strenuous that opposition might be.